Welcome to the Painter's Dialectic Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Green, a painter and art educator living in New York City. And today I've invited Rennard Lake, a Trinidadian-American artist who grew up in Brooklyn, to come speak with us. He is the first graduate of the artist errant training, the French academic tradition, and he's doing very well. He's getting a lot of attention. He's someone to watch. Rennard is an artist with a very bright future ahead of him, so listen closely and enjoy the show. All right, welcome everyone. Today we're interviewing the artist Rennard Lake, a Trinidadian-American artist from Brooklyn, and he's going to discuss his paintings and his artistic journey. And today, all donations, this interview for this month, are going to go to the Sudan Solidarity Collective. That was Rennard's choice, so be sure to send them something. And Rennard, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you everybody for showing up. Appreciate it.
So, Rennard, you just flew in from France, right?
Yes, so I flew in from France. I went to London for like 4 days. I was able to go to the Lighthouse, which was, I think, Britain's like, I guess, most revered portrait artist during like the 1900s. And they actually restored his house. So it's not made how he initially had it, but they did leave certain parts like his art studio where you can just walk in and it's really interesting. Just see it from his perspective. It's like, going back in time, but it has just all of his art, that they've over the years collected and then returned back to his house. So, it really, I was aware of him, but I became a bigger fan going to his house because, there's not too many artists. I think that just seeing only their art would be interesting, but his art kind of stands alone and is worthy of going to if you're ever in London. So I went there, and I went to Paris, and I went to it's called the Le Petit. I'm pronouncing it probably incorrectly.
The Petit
Pal-
Palais.
Palais, that's how they say it. Yeah, Le Petit Palais, and it had my favorite artist, which is William Bouguereau, but it also had Leon Bonnat, and just the great artists from the French tradition during the 18 and 1900s. A lot of them I had never heard of, and I love that era. So that was just it was really kind of surprising to really see, it really was a showcase, not just of any one particular artist, but of that artist movement of that time to show, it really showed how many great artists there are. It's just overwhelming, so yeah, so I was able to experience that and learn about some new artists that I'd never heard of, so. And then lastly, one of my favorite artists, which is Alphonse Mucha, in Paris, which is a place where he pretty much was known and lived for a long period of his time. They have a cafe that has his some of his original paintings. So that was a pretty cool experience. And it just was like overall as an artist, especially, learning the French tradition, it was the best of the best. So it was a great experience and very motivating.
Yeah, this is an important pilgrimage for you because, well, we're a part of this French academic tradition stemming from the studio of Jerome. And you got to see contemporaries at that time, Leon Bonnat and Bouguereau knew Jerome and were contemporaries together, some of the lead teachers. So you got to see the power of those techniques that you've been learning for so long,
Hmm.
at their height, at their pinnacle. So now that you're part of that tradition, what were you able to take from standing in front of a bonat, standing in front of one of the probably best bouguereaus on the planet, in my opinion. What'd you get out of that?
For me, the importance of giving your all in painting, because you don't know who it's going to affect later on in life. Even if it's, I stood in front of, each painting for, let's just say, at the very least for like maybe 30 to 40 seconds. But those 30 to 40 seconds were so impactful, you know? And I'm a complete stranger when Liam Bonnat or Bouguereau was painting these, you know, they weren't thinking about me or knowing how it would make, my year, so you just don't know how your art is going to be received on the other end. So for me, it's just about giving it your personal all, whatever that personal all is, and not just, I guess diminishing the importance of your art or that extra brush stroke that you should give that you don't, just on the technical side, that's what I gain because, it really is specifically that museum is a technical a display of technique, mastery of technique. And I know these techniques. Do I use them all to the greatest of my abilities every time I paint? Not always, but leaving there it gave me kind of a renewed, um, I guess, energy to really give my all, in regarding technique, not just
Mm.
finishing a painting, but really, like you said, thinking it through, you know.
Well, they were representatives of the tradition. They were the tradition at the time. That's who the entire academy was looking at. They were the
Hmm.
example, and
Hmm.
that's an enormous responsibility, getting your paintings examined, and they held it up and maintained it, and they're still the example, well over a century later. But let's jump into your context. So why don't you tell us a bit of your background, how you grew up, your family context?
Yeah, so really quickly, I I would personally was born in Brooklyn. My family, meaning not just my mother and father, but every aunt, uncle, cousin. We immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago. Um, and it's really specific. It's a specific event. It was during the civil rights movement. Many black civil rights leaders felt that the immigration policies were unfair because they limited the amount of black immigrants and Asian immigrants specifically. So in the 1960s, right after the civil rights bill, they passed the immigration bill, which made the what was considered a racial quota more open to people of African descent, which would include the Caribbean, and people of Asian descent, which would include the Caribbean. And my family is both. They're both Chinese and black from Trinidad. And so there was a rush of Trinidadians that came in the late 60s, and my family's part of that rush. So pretty much I grew up in a Trinidadian-American community that was very tight knit because at that time, all the families kind of had to pull together, put their resources together to really make themselves feel home in a foreign land. So I grew up in that kind of culture, being very aware of my Trinidadian roots, because everybody was from Trinidad or everybody was still coming, even in the 80s and stuff. So it's just very normal, to be in that, I guess, immigrant community. And then my family, we moved to New Jersey not soon after because at the time, Brooklyn was very dangerous. There was just, it was just the era, for many different reasons. I haven't really gone into it, but at that time, the Brooklyn that you know now is not the Brooklyn that it was. Brooklyn is a lot safer now. So due to safety and school systems, my family decided to move to New Jersey. So I grew up in New Jersey, but then we would always on the weekends go back to Brooklyn to be around family and around, my aunts, uncles, cousins. My grandparents both lived in the same neighborhood. And so we would just kind of going back and forth. So I grew up understanding, I guess, for lack of a better word, Jersey's suburban life, as well as I would say very specifically East Flatbush, Brooklyn, which is the Caribbean American community in America, So I grew up with kind of both in both of those worlds. So and it was honestly it was a very great experience because you just got to see just different people's perspectives versus New Jersey was more Sicilian, Puerto Rican, Filipino, and Brooklyn was like 100% Caribbean, and even the area we're in was almost all Trinidadians.
In your younger years, was there any interest in art, or was there art in that community?
What the thing about it is, like all kids are almost told to draw, right? That's one of the first things you do in school. And I've only recently reminisced and realized, what it was is most kids stop drawing. I never stopped, you know, and that is the only difference. I never said I'm gonna be an artist one day. I honestly didn't look at it as being an artist. I just like to draw and create, and I never stopped. But I didn't grow up around an artist community. None of my other friends were artists, so I didn't even conceive the idea of pursuing art. That was just foreign to me. I wasn't against it, but I didn't even think about it. And I did have teachers that told me to pursue art. They would say, "You're really good at drawing. You should pursue art." When I was very young, during all stages, when I was young in grammar school, maybe fourth or fifth grade, when I was in high school, I only took one art course, and the art teacher told me, you need to go to college and study art." And I just thought it was a empty compliment he was giving me. So I just ignored him. When I went to college, I think I had to draw one time for one like a history class, and the professor there said, "You need to pursue art." And once again, I just perceived it as like, what does that even mean? Thank you for the compliment. It would be like somebody telling me, "I really like those shoes." I didn't think that would mean like, maybe I should go to the store and buy more shoes. It's just a compliment. So I didn't take it. So people did tell me. So it's a weird situation where like everybody told me to be an artist, and I kind of was the last person to realize that I was an artist, even though people would tell me all the time through all stages of my life.
And I was pretty surprised to find out that you hadn't been to any of the art museums in the area either. And I mean, you grew up during a pretty great art era. It was pretty open then, but you weren't really engaged with that at all, right?
No, no. So like I just made art privately, and even a lot of my friends and family didn't know I did it. I just did it in my private, but outside of me creating art, I didn't think about anything else. I wasn't exposed to anything else. It's not like I lived a sheltered life, but it's, art museums are very specific. Like, you go on a class trip and you might go to like the planetarium or something like that. But we never went to like the Louvre, or I mean not the Louvre, but the Met or any of these places. It was right there. I grew up like 40 minutes, probably 35 minutes from the Met and all these other great art institutes. But like I said, my family, we were immigrants. It was like, all right, just get a job, work, situate yourself in America. That was their kind of push. And then my friends in Jersey, we just were into sports. I played basketball. I played street basketball a lot, so there just was, I just was, I probably in very specific communities that just did not value art, but there were probably, like I said, it's just probably, as you say, fate, where fate happened to not introduce me to the art world. If they had, I would have. I would have pursued it probably a lot more seriously, but it wasn't like a negative thing like where people were saying, "Don't be an artist." It just was not something that we could conceive, or any of my friends could really conceive.
So also the Trinidadian culture, you have all these parades, you have the music, you have this vibrant community. There is a big art culture, and inside it, could you discuss that a bit?
Yes, so the art culture is not oil painting specifically, though I do know a lot of oil painters now, but it's more of costume making, you know? So, we make our own costumes. It's a very creative endeavor. Carnival has different characters that they pull from our roots because in the Caribbean, you have West Africans that came during the transatlantic slave trade. You also have Indians from India, specifically in Trinidad, that were brought from the British to Trinidad. So we take their customs as well, and that's embedded. We have Asians, we have Chinese people, and their cultures are embedded in the costume making and the storytelling. So the art that I was exposed to is more related to music, the musical arts, of what's considered calypso and soca and kaizo music, which has West African origins and also Indian origins. So that's the type of art, music, which I still love. And many of my family, are musicians, specifically in the steel pan drums. They were involved in bands, still are. But that's the type of art we experience. But it's like anything else. Whatever is normal to you, you don't think of it, in these, I guess, intellectualize what's happening. You know, it's just part of my life. It's just like, okay, we go to carnival. These things are happening around us. We love music. We love hanging out with family, but we didn't look at it in the lens that I do now, which is this big art endeavor, and art culture, So I do look at it now, but during those times, it was just normal. Like going to carnival and spending time and listening to calypso music was just something normal that we did as a family to bond. And we just looked at it like that's what everybody does, And it's only when I went to college and was around people that were not from my culture and they started asking me questions that I realized that, oh, okay, this is unique. Growing up, it doesn't seem unique. It just seems very normal, even though you appreciate it.
So let's move into your adult life and what you did, and then the period where you decided to invest in actually being an artist.
Yeah, so I always did art, so I just kept on drawing, not painting, but I was always drawing. But then I was just living my life. I was just like, hey, I got to get a job. So I worked insurance in New Jersey after college. I then saved up my money. I got into real estate. Then I also got into the trucking business, which I'm still a part of the trucking business. Um, and it was just kind of that whole idea of pursuing the American dream of starting your own business. I did that. I was, it was like anything else. Is very, very time consuming, very stressful, but rewarding. You know what I mean? In many regards, and I'm very grateful. But through all of that, I never lost the love for the art. For creating art, and to fast forward to how I ended up meeting Josh for training, because to get trained in the French tradition is I realized after, I guess, pursuing business and pursuing these other things, um, I was getting a little bit older. I was approaching middle age, and I said to myself, um, you know, I guess I just had this thought in my mind of like, is there anything I have not pursued that I always wanted to pursue? And I just kind of envisioned, I think it was a YouTube video that said, envision the 80-year-old version of yourself and think about what you wanted to pursue but didn't pursue that. And I thought about it. I was like, I always wanted to paint very realistically, like in the museums, like the Renaissance. I didn't really have a term for it. I didn't know what French academic art was, but I know that I always gravitated towards that style, even though I didn't know what the style was. And I had an art history book from college of Bouguereau, so I remember that. And that's like 20 years later saying that that's the type of art I want to make, so long story short, um, I just said, you know what? Let me reach out. I was gonna actually go to what's considered the Angel Academy in Florence, Italy, and then the pandemic happened. And if you know about the pandemic, Italy got hit pretty hard. So I was like, I was gonna go to the Angel Academy for like 3 months, and the pandemic happened. And initially, I was like, man, woe is me. Why does this have to happen to me? And then I laughed about it. I'm like, man, the world is, collapsing. You're worried about art? Like, what's wrong with you? You know? And then I also thought to myself, there will always be a pandemic. There will always be something that seems ridiculously unfair that's in your way when you want to pursue your dream. Because that happened to me in real estate, that happened to me in trucking. Every aspect of my life, I've always had some big obstacle that I was able to overcome. So I say, you know what? Let me see if there's anybody online that it would be able to train me. And that's how I found Josh. He was on Wyzant, which was this tutoring website. And I don't remember the conversation we had, but we had a conversation, and he said he never tried it before, and he said that he would try to see if he could train me in the French tradition. And I just went with it. I knew nothing about art, so I had no preconceived notions. And I think that was a good thing. Like I was very ignorant of art. I didn't know anything about art. I just knew I liked to draw, and I knew I met this guy that said he trained in the same city that I wanted to go to. So I was like, all right, I'll just listen what he have to say, and hopefully it works. And within, I would say a couple of weeks, just the little techniques he taught me, I saw a huge improvement. And to backtrack just a little bit, I had tried to be self-taught, like all these artists on Instagram that say, man, I'm self-taught. I worked really hard at teaching myself, and I feel like I reached as far as I personally could take myself. So it was just perfect timing, and yeah, and so I trained with him for 4 years, and I enjoyed every moment. It was fun to me, so it was just learning something, just opening me up to a whole new world and making me just happy that I had pursued it. That's the best way I could describe it.
And it was fun watching you transform your these little spaces you lived in. We had the French tradition, you have to paint from natural light, which usually there's a skylight in the academy, but Bernard's at that academy. He's got a side window light facing, west or east, the worst direction. He sets up a still life in the closet, still life in the bedroom. He's got the Lowe's orange buckets building a table is crazy. But
Yeah,
but you did it.
yes, yes, yes.
But now you have a
And
pretty ideal spot. Now you have a very nice studio, large studio with
yeah,
nice lighting and a good set.
yeah. It's really crazy over those 4 years. It just I just evolved into the artist that I guess always dreamed I would be, and it just was gradual, so like it's very funny, like you said, when you compare my first art space to now, like I'm in an actual studio with great lighting, everything. So, but I feel like I'm glad that I painted in those other odd, strange spaces because it prepared me to appreciate where I am right now, So yeah.
All right, so why don't we present some of your art. I have 5 pieces here. All right, so let's move on to your first portrait drawing here. This is, I believe, charcoal on watercolor paper, right?
Yes, correct. So funny enough, this was a drawing. It's a portrait of my mother. Um, and it's something that as soon as I realized the level that, I was going to be able to be trained in, I envisioned doing this portrait, and I said and I kept on getting better incrementally, right? And I knew once I get to a certain level, I'm gonna do this portrait. I just had it in my mind, like I have to do this portrait for my mother, and it would be a gift to her. And it was just a great feeling to know that I could create it. And this was like very traditional, as they say, French tradition drawing. So it just, for lack of a better word, it was just a good feeling to create this. This was very just sentimental to make a portrait of my mother when she was younger. I believe she's like 19 here.
Yeah, and it's a straight-on Bouguereau pose.
Yes, yes.
But the first thing you did is you did a ton of these portraits of your family. That was the first thing you wanted to do.
Yeah, and it just shows I've just learned that, you just evolve in what your vision is as an artist. Like initially I said to myself, I'm gonna paint all these portraits for my family. I'm gonna like literally document everybody's image. And at first that sounded very exciting, and then you know, I it didn't sound as exciting after like the sixth or seventh portrait because I just felt like I'm making faces, and it's great. And there's an art to that, but I just feel like what I learned also, which Josh already knew, which I had to learn. You learn as an artist, you have a very limited time on this earth, so you really have to be very aware of what is the biggest priority and what you want to express while you're on Earth, because we're not going to be here forever. So you really want to make sure that you're prioritizing art that you really want to create. So I realized that there were other things I wanted to express as an artist other than just my love of my family. And also too, I will say this, this is no shade to anybody in my family. I initially thought that when I would paint a portrait of them, they would be head over heels, just so happy and appreciative, right? And the reality is they weren't. Some of them were, some of them didn't like my portraits of them. So I was like, wait, what am I doing this for? And it's not a negative on them. It's just that, it just taught me you have to make art. You can't make art specifically to make another person happy, because that's a little arrogant too. You don't know what makes them happy or what they need to make them happy. But ultimately, not everybody, but several people did not appreciate. Now, I wouldn't say they didn't appreciate my portrait. They just didn't want it. Like I was like, here you go. I framed it. And they were like, no, you can keep it. I was like, keep it. I don't want you in my room, but it was funny. And I took all of these things as lessons, and I didn't look at it as it being a negative on them. I looked at it as me being not self-aware that, you have to create art that's meaningful to yourself, and you share it with the world. And don't get me wrong, give somebody a portrait if they ask you. But if they don't ask you for a portrait themselves, they probably don't want one. And that's a simple lesson that I did not learn. I think that was a little bit of my ego. Once I learned these techniques, you start to feel like, man, this is amazing what I'm doing. but it's amazing to me, and some other people, but not everybody. And that is a good thing to realize that your art is not for everybody. Not everybody's gonna like your art. And I'm glad I learned that lesson almost immediately. So that was a good, humbling lesson.
Yeah, art is very humbling.
Yeah.
But I think also in these, I feel like there's an honoring of the effort of your family that you've reached this point and
Mhm.
you're in this place, maybe. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's not like they you know, threw my art on the ground and said, "Get that out of my house." But you know, but I just realized overall, it did kind of wake me up and say, "Okay, well, this idea of dedicating my entire life to painting portraits of my family, I don't think that that's gonna I think I realized that would probably burn out from that. There's creatively, there's just so many other things to do. And with that said, I still do portraits of my family. I've done one recently of my grandmother's sister, but those things are just when I feel it in my heart to do it, it just feels natural, rather than this just, very dramatic, you know, need to paint everybody in my family. I don't have that in it. And it just also taught me that, the ideas that you have today as an artist, tomorrow they evolve or they devolve, and that's okay. And just to not just be so rigid where you just have an idea and you feel like you have to commit to it. Sometimes a bad idea is a bridge to a good idea. So sometimes you don't get to that good idea if you stick and just commit to just this one idea and get tunnel vision. So that, just overall, all of these lessons and experiences just kind of compound your understanding of who you are as an artist.
So I think this is probably one of the first paintings you made once we finished training, I think.
Yes, yes. This is right before I finished training, but I knew I was feeling myself at this point. I was like, okay, I know how to paint, and as I stated earlier, this is a portrait of William Bouguereau. Um, I consider him like just amazing. But truth be told, in the art world oftentimes he's disrespected more than he's respected. He's seen as boring. He's seen it. There's just a million reasons that they have that they don't like Bouguereau, and I just disagree. I think he, at the time, as Josh, definitely shared with me, he was the person. He was the standard for French academic art, and he just became. I call this the forgotten master because he really is. He's like a forgotten master within the art world. A lot of people just have never heard of him. But one thing I do notice, and I again noticed it in Paris, but I noticed it in the museum in America, people that don't know anything about art, that have no, that just maybe just came to the museum just to show their kids, you know, regular people, everyday working class people love Bouguereau. When they see him, they are amazed, and I think there's something endearing about that. But yeah, he's one of my favorite artists, and I'm never gonna not like Bouguereau, you know, and yeah, he's a technical artist, so this was just a kind of homage to him.
All right, and this is your first, well, not your first, this is one of your first big personal works where
Yeah,
that your voice was starting to become strong.
yeah, because I mean, Josh, I mean, anybody that's trained in the French tradition is you have to be locked in technically, right? And it takes a lot of brain power. People don't realize, the training when you're doing these barks, these exact copies on very difficult surfaces to work with. So it's not just that you're having to figure out proportions, but you're also having to deal with different difficult textures to draw on, right? So I noticed that my brain power was going all towards the technical side, and a lot of the creativity that I had before I met Josh, it was just diminishing. And it's like I call myself like a shampoo artist. Like I was just drawing head and shoulders, just head and shoulders, head and shoulders. Like I just was so concerned with just replicating what I saw, because during that training, that's what you're doing. So I just found like even when I was thinking about ideas, I could not. I just kept on just replicating things, right? So eventually I painted one painting where it was just a replication again, and I looked at it, and me personally, I didn't like it, you know. And I just said, this isn't who. It's like I had this like epiphany. I'm like, this is not who you are, you know, and this is not why you got into this, to just make replicas of things you see. But I have very strong opinions about social issues. I've experienced a lot of experiences in life, both good and bad, that have given me, in my opinion, a global perspective, and I'm very passionate about humanity, and the underdog, and the underdog in society, who are in different, it shows itself in different faces, but I'm always rooting for the underdog in society that people pick on, the outsider. So I wanted to always, before I met Josh, and even when I was talking to Josh early on, represent that in some capacity. And I guess it's a weird thing. I kind of like, I had an emotional moment where I'm like, man, you're making the same art that you would confuse you before. Because a lot of times, one thing I did notice about, you know, these trained artists is like, I didn't see them, I guess, speaking to my voice, which they shouldn't have. I should have, but I found myself not even speaking to my own voice. So it just clicked, and it took no time at all. So, Sudan is a place right now that there's a huge genocide that's happening that is not being talked about for a lot of political reasons, because it's just not in a lot of big powers' benefit to speak on it. So it's happening, but it's happening in a vacuum. So I was aware of that for some time now, and I finally just said, you know what, I'm just gonna create this painting. But I was a little hesitant because I'm not Sudanese, right? So I'm speaking on a very sensitive topic, and I don't know how they'll feel about me. I'm not Muslim, I'm portraying a Sudanese Muslim woman, and I'm incorporating um I come from I'm not religious now, but I come from a Roman Catholic background. So the idea of angels and things of that nature, is very prevalent growing up. So, my Roman Catholicism background is being interjected into this painting, and I'm turning a Muslim girl into an angel. So I'm like, is that imagery even okay? So, I did have a kind of reservation about it. Let's say, you know what? Just create it, share it with the world. And I honestly thought that not a lot of people would like it, because a lot of people don't like politics in their art, right? And especially my family, they're not into talking about politics a lot and very weighty issues. I am, but a lot of my friends and family are not. So I just kind of did it for myself, to be honest with you. But when I shared it with Instagram, it went like diagonal sideways, like internationally. People that had actually survived, a woman that had actually survived the genocide, DM'd me directly to thank me, and had a very emotional um expression, and appreciation for this for this piece of art, that I thought was like possibly not going to be liked or just be ignored, and it was one of my most popular. pieces that, a lot of people reach out to me still, and it just came from a genuine place, but so that's how that happened, so it was like you just don't know what people will like, so I'm thinking in my mind this is going to be art that's just not going to be liked, and it's one of my more famous pieces. So that was the story on that, and it linked me with a lot of social organizations that are actually doing the work. So I've since then gained connections with a lot of activists that have kind of, you know, educated me on more on this issue as well as other issues that are interconnected. So it's just like kind of a life-changing experience as an artist. You know.
Well, it takes me back to the beginning of the of this talk where you're talking about, Bouguereau Bonat didn't know how their painting would function in the world, right? And
Mhm.
also, you're talking about the training and creativity. The way I think of it is we do this very disciplined and rigorous practice so that the creative force can just flow through you unimpeded. You don't have to think about it. You have the technique,
Mhm.
you can bring it into the world. So many people get blocked because they lack the technique or they don't have the material knowledge and they can't just get in that state. Um, but now you did that 4 years of hard work, and this is moving out and almost immediately, you're touching people's life and you get to hear that in your own lifetime.
Right.
You're affecting a whole community on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, it's as an artist, it's a great feeling, Um, it's a weird thing where like now I almost appreciate not going the traditional route as an artist because, you know, like I guess I've had enough life experiences to develop my own personal opinion and personal voice. And like you said, what was missing was the technical skill, you know? And then once I got the technical skill, then it was merging my voice with the technical skill, which also is a skill set that every artist has to learn. So I'm just very excited and appreciative of, like I said, the tradition because just as you said, it really it makes the creative side a lot easier because you don't have to worry about technique because you understand technique. And it's just a great tool. It doesn't it's not the end all technique is not the end all be all to being an artist, but it's definitely a huge powerful tool, that can help you express yourself. So
And also some of the paintings you made for different causes. These people aren't in a situation where they can express themselves safely, but you
right.
can, right? And you're
Hmm.
doing that kind of for them, and I think it's inspiring to them or gives them some hope, or at least that they're being seen. That someone was far away is witnessing it and is caring about it.
Yeah, and then, like I said, that's what I hope. And I just, I guess going back to the initial conversation about my family and giving them a portrait and thinking that they were gonna love it, one thing it just taught me is to just not have any expectations, but just receive any positivity that comes your way from the appreciation you have from art. Um, have gratitude for it, but not an expectation of it, because I feel, so I'm just kind of be very cautious of that and make sure that I'm just making art that is authentic. And yes, I do want to touch on social issues, but not just make sure that I'm not just, you know, jamming social issues into my art. I do try to make sure that I have integrity with it, and it's actually an idea and a creative one. It has to be creative. It has to be something that I'm comfortable with. and not just making political art for the sake of making political art.
So this, I believe it's a portrait of your grandmother, correct? And this came after that painting we just talked about.
Oh, well, yeah, well, actually, this is my grandmother's sister.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so how this came about, and like you were just referencing, when you learn the technical side of painting, it just frees you up to express yourself. And I say that to say that this painting came because my grandmother's sister turned 100 this year, like 100
mm,
years old. And I was able to just sit, we had a celebration for her, and she came, and everybody, it was like almost going back in time to our roots as immigrants coming to this country. So like everybody shared their stories about how she helped them and things of that nature. Because as an immigrant, oftentimes you come to the country without enough money to actually get an apartment. So you usually have to live with family. So she was one of the houses that housed a lot of Trinidadians that came to America at that time, and she would just house them for free. And she was oh yeah, and also she was my Chinese side. So she was just very liberal and was always adamant about the fact that people don't choose to be homeless. Like, being homeless and being down in your luck is never something that people decide to do. So you have to be kind to them. She would always share that. So like I just got inspired by it. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna do a portrait of her. And my grandmother passed away maybe like about 6 years ago. I haven't even done a portrait of her, but I just I felt it in that moment. And so this was a portrait of her. And in the background is home, which is Trinidad. And on the right side, you'll see mango trees. But I also did try to attempt at a little bit of a Chinese inspired art where you see the trees on the right side. I see that in a lot of Chinese art, even art that my grandmother used to have hanging up. The trees, for some reason, the trees will always be on the right side. I don't know the meaning behind that. And then I looked up um, Mandarin, and I hope I didn't butcher the language because it's very difficult to the Chinese calligraphy is very difficult and very specific. One little mark can change the complete um, meaning of it. But on the left, I attempted to write home in Chinese. And then when you see the red, anytime you see red in a Chinese drawing or painting, that is actually the signature of the artist. So that's like the stamp of the artist. So that in the red, that says Lake, which is my last name. So I did that for her. And then my grandmother passed. I mean, not my grandmother, but my grandmother's sister, who's pictured here. She passed away recently, about 2 weeks ago, and I was able to go to the house and give her daughter this portrait, which she had asked me for while she was still alive. So it was just a good moment where art has now become, um, in a weird way, just a bridge to healing and conversation within my family. Me going over there to give her that painting. She sat there and was able to talk to me about how she felt about losing her mother and things of that nature. So, yeah, art has just now become a very cathartic experience for me and for other people. So it's what you hope for, of experience in such a short time.
yeah, so one of the funner moments is I think it was your final still life. You had included Trinidadian and Chinese elements together in your still life, and there was
Yes.
that cloth, and you didn't know what it said, and I reached out to the one of the
Oh,
co-hosts here,
wow.
Dylan, and he was able to read it.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I completely forgot. And let me tell you, to give you a little bit of a background and make it as short as possible for time, is my grandmother raised me, right? Along with my mother and father, but she was in the house while everybody was working. So she's like my mother, and she's Chinese. And but she's Chinese that grew up in Trinidad. So she never went to she knows no Mandarin. She never went to China during her entire life. She lived to 90, never went. But she was a proud Chinese person, and she had this Chinese um like cloth that her father from Hong Kong had given her when she was like 8 years old. So, and she always had it hanging up. And as I got older, I'm like, Grandma, um, why do you have that upside down? She's like, why you say it's upside down? I'm like, because those are flamingos, those aren't bats, you know, and that's like how little she spoke Chinese that she actually had the painting hanging upside down. And her father gave it to her as a gift when she was 8 years old. She kept it all those years up until the point where she died, and she never knew what it meant. She never translated it. So Josh's friend Dylan, who was from Hong Kong, to finally translate it, and it was so sweet and endearing. I was so sad that she never knew what her father gave her. Where in a long story short, it was about her choosing the right husband, you know, like so it was like a big poem. It was like very involved, you know, but the long story short, the main theme of it was to use wisdom in choosing the right husband. And my grandmother did, like my grandfather, he passed away before she did, but she never remarried, and she had all his love notes and still in a little box, and she would just speak so highly of my grandfather. And so it was just a very interesting, um, cute thing that my great grandfather did for her that she never knew, but I was able to finally solve that mystery. Because I asked a Chinese person one time at work to translate it. She's like, it's too much, you know. I don't know what that meant, but Dylan, when he explained to me, it's like a poem, you know. So thank you for that, Josh. I forgot to mention that. That was a great moment.
So in Europe, you would train from a child in the studio of a master, right? And you'd start sweeping the floor and cleaning the place, and you eventually work your way up to actually painting on some of the paintings. And after you completed that, you would become a journeyman, and you'd go work for other artists, maybe another city to kind of broaden your skills. And when you're ready, you would come back and you'd make a capolavoro, a masterpiece. And that masterpiece would be to prove if you were a master artist. And you would submit it to the guild in your town, and they would vote on it whether you're a master or not. And they would let you into the guild, and then you could open your own studio and be a professional working artist. That's the way it used to be. In the academic tradition, there is a final kind of masterpiece. I think this is Renard's Capolavoro. I think it's still in progress, and why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where like the training has been so helpful. Like I knew you had told me about the masterpiece portion of the training, so I took it very literally. So as soon as I was done, I had in my mind, I'm gonna do a life-size portrait from head to toe. And you know, I just that was something that I definitely committed to. And I just bumped into somebody, you know, at a restaurant that I was eating at, and the woman had presents. So I was like, you know what, um, it, I'm gonna I'm gonna try to portray her as in this portrait, but also, you know, simultaneously, Josh had explained to me how a lot of models for academic art are treated as inanimate objects, are treated very poorly by the artists, right? And he shared like how they're not compensated correctly. The artist is very rude to them oftentimes, not all the times, but he was saying that it is an issue in art. So, you know, I took that conversation. I said, you know what? I'm gonna pay this person very well, and I'm also going to involve her in this painting and give her a voice where she's not just sitting there. Not there is an art for the record to modeling, but I wanted to have her involved and have a voice and have agency in this painting, right? And to have an experience that was positive, where she would walk away feeling good about it, not feeling like, well, okay, I made money, but I didn't like this artist, right? So, Josh, that conversation just really stuck with me. And that's what happened. When I asked her, I said, hey, you know, I want to do a portrait. I want to involve you. You tell me, your favorite color. You tell me what you would like to wear. And then Josh also told me about the female gaze, which is a gaze that it happens in art, where the woman is looking away because the idea is that they are there to be gazed at by a male, a male gaze. And I explained that to her. I was like, you could either look away, as a male gaze, or you could look directly at the viewer and you would be considered more humanized. And she immediately said, okay, well, I want to look directly at the viewer. And then I said, well, okay. And then she did say, well, I don't care too much about my favorite color. I just want to represent Haiti because I'm a proud Haitian American, right? So that completely changed this portrait because I wanted, in my mind, to just redo a famous portrait called Madame X by Sargent. I was going to have her pose in the same exact pose and I would just have her with a Haitian flag. But when she said that she wanted to look directly at the viewer, it changed everything. And I'm glad it did. And I'm glad I involved her because it just kept on creating. So, so then I came up with the idea of you know, beheading Napoleon. All right. So I had his head in a basket. And even once again, incorporating her, she was very creative where, I had her pose for in different ways. And finally I had her for like 10, I had her for like 5 more minutes of her time, right, that I was paying for. So I said, well, you know what, just freestyle. You hold that basket in the way that you would hold it, after having just beheaded an enemy of yours. And she said, well, in Haiti, we will hold the basket on the top of our head. And as soon as she said that, I said, that's it. That's that's not just Haiti, but that's like a cultural connection of African Americans to Trinidadians to Africans, all that image of the woman with the basket on their head is it's a common cultural archetype. So it was just this experience has been so great because I just giving her a voice, it really shows you that, everybody's creative and you can learn from everybody. And the idea I had for this painting was so boring. And luckily, having a conversation with Josh, and just give it, just listening to her and her ideas and asking her advice, it paid off. And I'm not done with this portrait. There's a lot more to do, but um, this is a portrait that's more than likely going to go in the museum for a guy that reached out to me in Atlanta once I'm finished with it. So it's just been a very transformative experience, and I've been working on it for about a year, and in that time I've gone to a lot of different museums. So I've been able to develop it and develop creatively, in that year. So I'm glad that I didn't finish it in 3 months because I'm continually growing as an artist. So, I think I'm ready to finish it, but I wasn't ready to finish it last year, so that's the story on that.
Yeah, and you're fresh off this pilgrimage to see the heads of the lineage.
Oh
Um,
yeah, so now it's like gonna be on a whole different level, man. So I'm just excited, and as I talk to Josh all the time and tell him like, I'm living my dream. This is my dream, like I don't care. I hate to say I don't care about money. I mean, obviously, if somebody want to pay me, I'm gonna take the money and be happy about it. But actually creating and being able to just create a painting like this and the experience of it, and even like the model, she reaches out to me all the time. She's just very excited about it, very supportive. It's just amazing. You know, that this is the dream for me. So I've just have promised myself um, to just enjoy the entire journey and not be focused on some fictitious endpoint. Like, nah, I just enjoy every moment.
All right, so maybe just make a few more statements, Renard, about what you're envisioning for the future, and then we're going to open up to the audience for a question and answer.
Well, I guess, oh yeah, well, the bigger vision I do have is larger scale paintings, especially after going to France. It was even before, but I I don't know. I was just blown away by large scale paintings, and I definitely want to move in that direction, and I think just continue to be open minded. I think, that's what's paid in dividends, where I'm just, like I know that I'm gonna make certain paintings that, uplift people and uplift the underdogs of society. But um outside of that, I'm just open to the fact that I don't know what I'm gonna be doing in 10 years, but I know it's gonna involve art, and I'm going to continue to learn, you know. And I think that's the best thing about this tradition is if you take it seriously, you'll never have an ego because there's always more to learn, so it just is self-correcting, where, I'm a very confident person, and it definitely humbles me to say at the end of the day, I'll never be a master, but my goal is the infinite pursuit of trying to be a master, and you do that through humility and understanding that you'll never know it all, but you can learn as much as you can while you're still on this earth. So it's just, I think the pursuit of mastery, even though I know in my heart of hearts I would never reach that pursuit, but there will always be something more to strive for. And I think that's what's very fulfilling, that there's no end game, where some people make certain amount of money and then money doesn't matter anymore and they go crazy and get weird. That doesn't happen in art if you're truly honest and have self-awareness with your skill level, of whatever you're doing. You can always be better. So I think that is fulfilling, knowing that there's a purpose, greater than yourself, always, no matter what stage of the game you're in.
Well, congratulations, Renard. Let's open it up now. Does anyone have anything to say to Renard or any questions? All right, Dylan.
I'll go. Yeah, Rennard, it's good to see you again. It's so nice to
Always
watch all the.
great, man.
Yeah, it's awesome to see all this progress that you've made, and I think it's just a testament to like a lot of people don't try really, but it's just how far you can go if you just try and approach things with curiosity and humility. You can just go as far as you've gone and even farther. So this is such a treat to see these paintings. Just
Thank
get
you.
better and better, and the meaning and the creativity and the technical. It's all really inspiring. So thank you for sharing all that.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate it, man.
All right, Kenny, where you going next?
Yeah, I don't have any questions, Renard. I constantly just go back to our first conversation about Josh and myself, and just hearing you talk, and you speak with that same passion from the get go, and you come with it with the same like intent. So to see your skills develop and like catch up with all the things that you got going on and what you want to pursue. Um, for me, it's beautiful to see, considering that it wasn't like that long ago that this all like kind of
Yeah.
started. So,
Yes.
um, Yeah, and to see you tackle all these things, like Josh, when he had us on, there wasn't much to tell you but to like trust yourself, and you're clearly doing that.
Thank you. Appreciate that, man.
What about Phoenix over there? Next in the lineage.
Yeah, I have a few things to say. Um, I think it's been cool seeing Renard, your first student, evolve and develop. And I've shown my parents some of your work,
Oh wow,
and
thank
they're like,
you.
"What?" Yeah, they're like, "Oh my
Uh,
God, are you gonna be able to do stuff like that?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I hope so."
you will, and
um,
better and more.
um, and some of my questions are like, you were saying you wanted to move on to larger scale works. So, like, what is the average sizes of some of the stuff that you've done? And then I think you briefly said, that you're working on things for about 3 months, although you're doing this last one ongoing for like a year now. So, like, what is the average size and time that it takes you to finish?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Yeah, so like my sweet spot is usually around 30 inches by maybe 26, somewhere in that range, sometimes 24 by 22. I love that spot. It's big enough where you can really get a lot of detail, because I paint on, and I'm sure you do as well, Belgian linen. So the smaller the scale, the harder it is as a material to get details, but I do both. So I always have maybe 30 by 28 painting hovering around at all times. I have my big one that is just like my baby. Um, and then I have these small wood panel paintings that Josh gave me great advice, but it paid in dividends where it's like probably 10 inch by 10 inch, right? So a lot of the paintings I have on Instagram are are mini paintings really, but and he was telling me just very pragmatic and practical, which is what Josh is. And he said that like, hey, you're gonna make all these paintings and you're not gonna have a place to hold them, right? And that was very good advice, right? But that's not what paid off for me doing that. I was able to build my skill because having to paint, having to express a lot of emotion and a lot of social issues in 10-inch by 10-inch frame is very difficult. So it really raised my skill level. So when I went back to my bigger scale paintings, it was like a walk in the park, and I was able to do so much. And just in general, it just because those paintings, those 10 by 10s, I do in a week. So it's only because I've been traveling recently, but I was pretty much I could knock out a painting in a week on a 10 by 10. The 24 by 22 or 30 by 26, those usually take maybe like a couple months. And then the large scale painting, it didn't I could literally have probably painted that in about 3 months, but what I've learned is the time is not always for me to paint, it's to think, to really develop a concept, right? I have some really bad ideas, and it's really crazy stuff that I start out with, and then I look at the painting and I say, this is terrible, and it creates a good idea, so the more time you have to develop those ideas, the better. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes ideas just come to me like that, and the same thing I think of is the same thing I paint, and I love it, But more often than not, at best, I'll create a mediocre idea, then I'll look at it, and what I'll do is I'll draw like a real quick pen sketch, because you'll notice as you develop your skills, if you haven't gotten there already, you can literally just envision a full-fledged painting. right? Without having to paint, right? So you can look at it, look at the proportions, look at the composition as a whole and say, does this make sense visually? And then either move on and scrap it or do something else. So I do that, a lot, so the time frame, skill set wise, would probably take at the most a month, no matter what painting we're talking about. But to develop the idea in an authentic way, it takes a while, it takes sometimes 2, 3 months, and that's usually the sweet spot. But before I would be in a race, like I gotta think of an idea and finish it. I really don't feel, probably because right now I'm not under contract, but I don't put that pressure on myself. I'll always do 2, 3 paintings. So I'll do the one small painting that I finish fast. So that gives me that dopamine to say, all right, I completed something. And then these other two, I'm creating and more developing their ideas a little bit more. So the mini paintings I kind of finish pretty fast. And it allows me to not feel guilt for taking longer with the bigger scale paintings.
All right, a special request from me. So
Okay,
Phoenix is getting towards the end of the barg training. It's been a
okay.
long, slow process.
I
You
know,
have two
especially,
people that
yeah,
finished it here. Dylan completed barg drawing, and
yes,
I gave
yes,
Dylan the hardest one there is. He spent almost an
that is a
entire
fact.
year finishing his Belvedere torso. So, any advice from you two for the struggling barg?
During it or
Real
after?
quick.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Uh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. That was really good as well, Dylan. I saw that one too. That was amazing too.
Oh, thanks a lot.
I agree as well.
All right.
Renard,
Yes.
when you work with Josh, did he teach you in person or over the internet or like your
No,
work
it
with
it
Josh?
was it was over the internet. So when I went to visit him in person the first time, it was like awkward for both of us because I'm like, you're a real person. So, but he was just very good. He told me what to do, and I followed it, and it worked.
Was it
That's
best being taught in person or where
I
did you
don't
learn the most?
I didn't learn anything in person. When we went, and by the time we went in person, it was to hang. Well, I could say that he took me to museums and he was teaching me from that perspective, but we weren't sitting in the studio learning painting techniques or anything. He was just we when we
Looking at
met,
art.
it was just to go to the Met and he would show, hey, this is this style of painting, this is what they did, look at the temperature. So in general, I don't know what it is to have a teacher in person. So I can't really say what I prefer because I never had it. So yeah, so it's very unique. So like by the time I saw him in person, we were fully involved in paint in technique and all of those things.
Uh-huh. And
Yeah.
was there a spiritual component to the teaching?
It was, initially, um, I
There was
was.
no meditation instruction or anything
Oh,
like
oh,
that.
that's what.
That's what she
Well,
means.
Josh is a very spiritual person. So like when he was first talking, it just seemed like it was a very. He would discuss those things, but no, it wasn't. Yeah, I guess I don't know what. I guess maybe I don't know what you're referring
No, no,
to in that
Renard's
way.
not interested in that. He's just an academic student. But Renard has said
Uh,
that
yeah.
painting has become his spirituality.
It has. I don't say it out loud because I know a lot of my family are very religious, but it really is a spiritual experience, it genuinely is. And I will say this, I will give him credit that Josh did kind of open me up to that concept. He didn't do it very directly, but he did it very indirectly in conversations we had over time because I've known Josh now for 4 years, and Phoenix and Dylan will tell you when you're doing the bar, it's a very intimate experience with your teacher. You learn a lot about that person as well as yourself. So even though he doesn't believe he shared that with me, I do remember vividly a lot of conversations about spirituality as it pertains to art. And I did, um, I listened. I was probably a little bit, like he's saying, a little hesitant to embrace it, but it's undeniable over time, especially when you go, and like I said, you see the French tradition in person. You realize that this is not. It's more than just technical skill at display. People are giving their whole soul to this thing. It is. You know, I can't explain it, but it's real. You know,
Thank
Josh could
you.
probably explain it better. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I went to the Met with Josh too, and on the topic of meeting Josh, he's taller than you think. But
That's
yeah,
true. Yeah.
I when you go to the Met and you see the stuff for the first time, it's like these paintings have this lifelike quality that you describe as if they're vibrating, and I see this in your work too. It's like there's a very lifelike quality in it. And on the topic of the Barg, I was actually going to ask you, like, what kept you motivated? Because my experience with academic art is that it's stressful and frustrating and unpleasant and boring all at the same time. And it was what helped me was like I had a lesson every week, and if I didn't do anything, Josh would yell at me, so I had to do something. So the artificial deadlines like kept me working on it, but there is something like inside of the Barg. It took me a long time to realize this, but in our culture, like we're just a culture of distraction. Like everything is grabbing our attention, so no one can sit with themselves, and no one can sit with anything difficult for more than like a few seconds. So to dedicate hours to doing something that is good for you and will improve you, but maybe you're not enjoying it per se. And sometimes I would enjoy the practice, but like I don't know. It was just like changed my relationship to stress and frustration and my attention, and I found that very, very valuable. But it took months and months for me to see that. And I guess the routine helps too, like having a dedicated space and a dedicated time and prioritizing it. But just got diagnosed with inattentive ADHD, and I think that was like a part of it, of just like focusing is hard and sustained attention is really hard. So I went my whole life without being diagnosed with that. So that like that's been a thing for me lately. But I think it's something as difficult as the Barg is just so healthy, and it's so difficult and so long. It's worthwhile because you don't forget it. Like a lot of these things you learn so quickly, and it's like you just forget it. But it sticks with you forever, and I use it in my work all the time. So, but I was curious about like when I think about you and your work, it's like you're just so steadfast, and I wonder what it was like for you. Like, was it the love that kept you going, or was it frustrating, or what kept you so motivated and putting so much time into it?
You know what? I guess my background, like I was in the trucking business, which is crazy. You know what I'm saying? It's complete chaos under the guise of business. You know what I mean? So, like you just described, the Barg is routine, right? It's complete control. And I had a level of comfort in that and saying, man, these maniacs, they're away from me, like I can just lock in. And thank you for sharing that because I wasn't going to share this, but this is the other truth to it. I got diagnosed in June. I have ADHD as well. It's crazy you say that. I have attentive and inattentive, you know. So for me, I will not lie. I do have this, and I learned what it is. It's a hyper focus thing. So like for things that are very niche, I really hyper focus. And actually, this experience in art kind of made me realize maybe to check it out to see if and get diagnosed because Josh would say, how long do you spend, on the bark, I'm like, oh, maybe 8 hours, 9 hours. And he's like, no, you don't. I was like, yeah, sometimes I don't eat, and I wasn't even thinking about it. But honestly, the cheat code, having ADHD for most areas of your life, it wreaks havoc on you. It's not fun, at all. And nobody understands and blah, 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 but this was the one thing that I could do really well, which was just focus, and hyper focus. So it was just calming, and I think it was more ADHD than my personality, so that ADHD helped in this case, you know what I mean? But so that thank you for sharing that because it's something new to me too as well, and it's kind of a embarrassing thing to share to a certain extent. So thank you for sharing that because that just gave me a little if you want to say a little courage to share that part of the process. So that like the hyper focus, for some reason, art in my brain, it just connects where I once I'm doing art, that's it. Everything else, it's like it turned into, chaotic mind. But with art, I'm quiet. I don't need to eat. I just zone in, and it's like for a moment I get to experience like I guess what people's perception of heaven is. It's how I feel, like it's like euphoric. So the Barg was euphoric for me, except that one time when Josh did make me completely erase a Barg I've been working on for 2 weeks. I can't. So I did have a lot of moments of frustration. So I won't lie and say, oh, I just hyper focused the whole time. Yeah, it was really hard. Even like the material that he told me to use very early on, I'm like, this guy doesn't, he gave me the wrong material, because he gave like that hard watercolor paper. And I was like, I tried to do it and I got frustrated. You start talking to yourself. And I remember just being mad at Josh. I'm like, this guy did not do his research. I can't draw on this paper. And then he was just like, no, that's the right paper. And once I got into it and I figured out how to chip into the watercolor, then it became soothing. And I ain't gonna lie, at the very end, I was kind of sad it was over, you know. Because I kind of got into the routine of doing it every day. It became um therapeutic and like almost like meditative. But like as you're aware, it doesn't start out that way. It's very frustrating.
Renard,
Yes.
knowing these things about yourself, knowing these things about your practice, and just seeing like where you're at right now, um, is there any way to kind of like speak about seeing artwork before you begin to take this journey and then going to museums and looking at artwork now? Is the inspiration a little bit different as far as wanting to do paintings like those, or like how are you like absorbing the
Oh, yeah, it's like night and day. Like, first of all, when I used to go I always went to art museums. I will say that, but there were times where it's just like, me personally, I just felt stupid. Like I'm sitting there looking at art. I'm like, am I supposed to say something? Like, what am I supposed to do right now? Like, am I supposed to understand what's going on? Like I just had a complete lack of understanding of how to relate to the art, right? I when I would see realism, um, I would enjoy it, but that was it. It was just a very surface level experience with art, which we all have a starting point, right? So it's not to diminish it. But as I started getting, because even when I went to the Met the first time with Josh, um, he sounded like he was from Mars, the way he was describing art. Like, I'm like, how does he see these stuff? He was just like, I'm like, it was just weird. I'm like, is he weird? I couldn't figure it out. It just seemed too artsy for me. And then as I got trained, Josh started seeming a lot more normal, and I'm like, oh, this is just a normal guy. He just and I realized that I just didn't understand the language of art, specifically academic art, when specifically the temperature. When he would speak about temperature, I'm like, what temperature? I'm like, what? Hot, cold? I'm like, I don't get it. And I just thought he was trying to take me in this weird spiritual realm, but no, he was speaking just very practically, like so like now like and to answer your question, when I go to a museum, I learn now. First of all, I know where they were standing, right? Then I know what brushstrokes they used, then I know, okay, what temperature decisions they made, to make certain parts look hot, certain parts look cold. I look at the soft edges and where they put hard edges. I look at where they're pointing to see, okay, what's the main character in this painting? Okay, what's the secondary character? What's the tertiary? Like there's so much to see now. And it's honestly now it's like visually overwhelming because I'm taking in so much information. So it's overwhelmingly beautiful to go to a museum now. Like I'm addicted because now it's like they're speaking my language versus before it's like they were speaking a foreign language that I really wanted to learn, but was just like kind of a fish out of water.
How many
Now
museums have you been to this year,
this
Renard?
year, honestly, probably somewhere around 20 to maybe 30 at the most. Yeah, probably about 20 or 30. Yeah.
He's
So
a
like I've
truck
been,
driver. He gets around.
yeah. Yeah, so like I now it's like it's added a whole new purpose. So like I get paid to drive to a museum, so I'll make sure that I go to Kansas City, I go to all these different and now that I'm well, one thing I've learned is there's real rich people in every state, and they back in the day they invested in the arts. So there's really great museums within America alone. You don't even have to go to Paris anywhere else to see the Bouguereaus and all these other great artists. Monets are everywhere, just scattered through America. So it's been a great experience, now because it's not that it's just the fact that like I can go there and feel like I'm being genuine when I'm appreciating the art, right? I've always felt like I was kind of halfway faking it. Like I liked it, but I didn't really understand what was going on, So I feel more at home now.
With that being said, and like I guess like lean on to the second part of that question is, um, because I think I was talking also asking about like the inspiration and influence of it. What parts are you now appreciating about the things that you do decipher from like what you're seeing and what you're appreciating, and like what are you appreciating about the decisions and stuff that you're making within your work?
Within my own work, um, ooh, that's a real good question. I would say, um, probably the decisions these other artists were not able to make, right? Most of these artists, they work for the Pope, so it's like, oh, they work for some really rich religious organization. So Boogaloo is just like, I'm painting angels because angels is what's paying my bills, right? Um, versus decisions I make, nobody's telling me what to paint for. Like I'm doing a commission recently, but even with that, I'm doing it on my own terms. And unlike these masters, which were beholden to the Medicis or these really rich families where they had to have religious themes, so they had to have specific, specific, like even I look at there's a black the first that I'm aware of African American to finish the French tradition. His name is Henry Oswald Tanner. He was a master, but when you go to these museums, most people don't even know his paintings are done by a black person because in that era he wasn't allowed to paint religious figures with African features, So knowing that history and knowing that I'm just free to paint whatever I want to, there's nobody over me influencing my decision. I'm influenced by my experiences. So yeah, I'm influenced if I'm talking to you, if I'm talking to Josh or whoever, but in a natural way. But I don't have an oligarch that's telling me what to paint. And that's what I appreciate, which I think is unique to me. And because I make my money outside of art, I think if I'll be honest with you, if I had to pay my bills off of art, the younger version, maybe not now, but the younger version of me would have painted whatever I thought was gonna sell. So if it was puppy dogs, I'd be painting puppy dogs all day long if I thought that was gonna pay my bills when I was younger, right? Versus now, I don't think about I don't make art in a sense as a commodity to be sold. I make it genuinely from my soul to connect with people that I believe um, would appreciate it, if that makes any sense.
Nah, I thank you for all that. I think your explanation of it is beautiful. I love to like hear these things of how you like go through your process, how you absorb everything, and how you like spit it back out for us to all take a part in. Um, but yeah, that's all I had to say. I think that's a great testament to you and just like
You.
the purpose that you have for your own life. And I also want to say that's a great testament to like Josh and like just being around good people who like actually like
Yes.
care like for like the craft and other people as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, Josh, he didn't just train me. I give him a lot of credit, it wasn't just training on technique, he did also kind of make me keep allow me to keep in mind to not be dogmatic and not only appreciate academic art, and even sharing with me you know for lack of a better word, you know the way in which Hitler demonized modern art, things of that. I didn't know any of that history, so it definitely helped me keep an open mind, to artists that are not like me, or or not like Bouguereau, and are coming from a different tradition. So he was very adamant about respecting art traditions outside of your own, So I appreciate him for that. That's the kind of vibe I would have been on anyway, but it was just very helpful to have somebody instructing me that I think was just very responsible in the lens and the framing of the art world, So we definitely have a lot of conversations about art that had nothing to do with my personal, um, barg. It wasn't just a transaction. Okay, I'm teaching you techniques and that's it. He gave me a lot more than what I expected. And just the history of art. Because he's done his research. I will say that much. It's like an encyclopedia.
Pam, did you have something else you want to ask? Or Ron hasn't got to ask anything either. Or okay, do you want to ask and then we let Ron ask?
I just wanted to say, the recent big sale of the Klimt was like the most expensive painting ever sold, and that was a commission. They were he Klimt commission got any commissions. I'm just saying, don't count out commissions.
Okay, I I will take that. I will take that advice.
And Ron?
Uh, I was just gonna say, related to your last comment, the art to me seems like it has a very classical look and a classical feel, and like there's that incorporates certain elements of history in it as well as that. I don't know if there's any intent of yours to do that, to kind of capture, over the arc of what you're doing, some kind of history, or you know some kind of like I don't know, it's like a visual journal to look back at or something of that sort.
Yeah, I I would say yeah, yeah. To answer your question quickly, yes. And I think I do both, right? I guess I do want to reflect our current times for certain things that I feel um need to be highlighted. but I also like to do just portraits of people, you know? So like I I try my best. It's also a weird thing. Like I go on binges of certain type of topics that I get really heavy on topics, right? And then I'll try to go in a completely different direction and just do a portrait, right? But and my goal is to be authentic to my personality. I'm not always into politics. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm serious as hell. Josh will tell you I laugh and joke a lot. I'm really silly, you know. So I do still challenge myself to make sure that my art reflects genuinely all the facets of who I am as a human being, not just one thing that, in a sense, makes me an artist, you know? Like, so yeah, so I do a lot of history because I am also into history. That's like a thing that I do. And that's what happens too. Whatever I read, I end up painting. So sometimes I have to, then if I'm traveling, and I'm not reading, that'll be reflected in art. It's, you know, so, you know, it is a kind of a weird thing where whatever is reflected in my paintings, you can almost guess that it didn't come out of thin air. It's like that's where my mind was focused at that specific time. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's because I'm on my phone too much. You know, so it's my algorithm. So it's like, but that's real too. I mean, we live in a world of algorithms, so your algorithm is going to affect your art. So it is that. So that's a great observation. You know, but yeah, it is true.
And it's like each element, it gives it an individual angle, which reflects,
Hmm.
the times, the current
Hmm.
times, and a certain perspective on it. So it's yeah, it gives a history, its own history. So that's, yeah,
Yeah.
it all compiles, gives a composite view.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
In the last uh, painting, the Capolavoro, the masterpiece, the final work, right? There is a reference, which I think was what you get into, to Judith and Holofernes. If you
Oh
know
yes,
the
yes.
biblical story, um, she saves the town by cutting off the head of the invader. Yeah, works well
Yeah,
with the
so
French.
yeah, it does. Yeah. So like, so that's the other thing, you know, the person I was painting, she's a Haitian American, right? So if you know anything about Haitian history, they fought the French. So, um, you know, I borrowed from a very, in a sense, this is a very academic, um, subject, which is, you know, the beheading, and usually it's referring to Holofernes in the Bible. And I took that idea and I turned it into, I flipped it into the Haitian perspective, where now instead of Holofernes, it's Napoleon, you know, from a Haitian's perspective, you know. But one thing, even with that, and going, and Ken, you were talking about like how you're affected by art. When I go to these museums, I knew I was going to do a beheading, but I have been to, I think it was in London, and it was a Caravaggio, and it was a beheading, and this woman just saw how graphic it was, and she was like, and she just walked right past it. So like she walked right past one of the greatest paintings ever, right? So I said, I that affected this painting where I said, I don't want to make it so graphic where a person can't even look at the painting, right? So I thought like, well, how can I make it and make you feel death without you feeling sick to your stomach, you know? So that's another example of how going to these museums and seeing these art, it's not just seeing the art, but looking at people looking at the art, I do as well, and seeing their reactions, and that influences me as well, you know? So I'm still gonna grow some people out with this painting, but it's not as crazy as my initial idea because I don't want the gore to actually overshadow the message, or make it a gimmick, but yeah, so it's uh, all of these things really make art fun, because you just get twisted in so many different directions, and there's so much influence, not like I said, not just from the artists themselves, but just from a random person that just comes up in the museum. I'll never forget her look of terror when she saw that painting. She was just like, this ain't for me. She just almost ran past it.
I wanted to know, obviously, through all your training and stuff, it unlocked a lot of freedom for you. So I kind of have like two questions, like a loaded one, being, do you feel like there's any difficulty, or do you feel like there's anything you still feel limited in being able to say what you want to say? Like, is there anything you're still working on getting better at? And also having the freedom that you do now with the amount of choices that you have to make, is it hard for you to like narrow down all the choices? Um, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. To answer the latter first is that it becomes more of a process of elimination more than addition, you know. So when I create a lot of these paintings, there's so much more in it, and I realize it's just too distracting, like there's too much going on. But what has been helpful is I'll I'll remove a couple ideas and images from one painting, and it's funny. Later on, I'll be able to use that in a better context that makes more sense. So I am limited by I'm not just making art for myself, right? Some artists do, right? But I actually want people to understand and be able to communicate with this art. So I do have to factor in sometimes too much images is overwhelming, even though I would like to paint it. My bigger thing is making a painting that um, I guess it's not too wordy, if that makes any sense. So I try to nail it and have a sweet spot, just like speaking. Like we have a lot on our minds right now, but for the purposes of this conversation, I have to tone it down a little bit, right? So that I don't lose people or people just don't start nodding to sleep because I'm rambling. Same thing in painting, a lot of times I can ramble but one thing because of the barg, it taught me self-awareness and it taught me, in a sense, to have the Josh voice that says it's not good enough. So you need that. And for me, I was born with it, a positive voice where you can do anything. I'm that type of person naturally, so I needed a balance. So in a sense, that does limit me sometimes, and also too sometimes I'm wrong. Like anything else, sometimes I edit too much out, So I I think that's the challenge. As every time you're creating a painting, is sometimes you get it wrong, and some of my favorite paintings are the paintings I got wrong because the next one, I'm able to make that correction, and it's all self-evaluation, right? There is no right or wrong, but there's a right or wrong within my mind, and I say, you know what? I didn't express myself the best way I could have with my skill as a creative, what I mean, which is different than a technical skill. So yeah, and then as far as messages, yeah, because even though like I touch on topics, honestly, I'm really censoring myself. Like there's a like I could go further, but sometimes I'm like, like, all right, like calm down a little bit, not everything has to have like a picket sign and just in your face, raw, emotion and violence, but it's like I know peace and I know violence, and I know extremities. So my tendencies to be very extreme. And even Josh was explaining to me like the French tradition is a lot of subtlety. So I feel like I try to make it a hybrid, you know, because it's like if you scream too much, nobody hears you, you get deaf. But if you're quiet too much, nobody hears anything. So just balance, you know. So I'm never right. I always get it wrong, and I'm always fighting with that. And that's the fun part of the creative side. Is like, you know, one decision completely changes everything, you know.
Oh man, it's been a journey, and I'm excited to
Yes.
see where Renard is in 5 more years. Very excited for that.
Thank you, thank you.
And
Yes.
good luck with big paintings. That's the other problem. It's not just making the work. Once you make it, guess who has to figure out where it's going? You,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
You gotta have the legs part of it. Going out,
Going out,
working, dealing with galleries, dealing with artists,
dealing with
review visits, renting a storage unit. Yeah.
the fun stuff. Yeah.
Congratulations, Bernard, and
And thank you
excited
everybody
to see the show.
for your words.